Kicking off the new season of Positivity Hack delivered after a summer break, welcome to Ph.D. with Women in IT Hack the Future. My name is Jamil Navarosa, and today's Ph.D. Positivity Hack delivered will be by our guest, Dr. Gilly Kahn. Our topic for today is titled Allow Me to Interrupt. Episode 191 starts here. Let me remind you, this is a grassroots community that focuses on women on IT, an inclusive forum, women in technology, startups, and female leaders who are supported by men as well. And we bring heart to that hustle because our empathy is our motto, and empathy is critical to understanding the inner world and the emotional landscape of women, especially when they may be feeling interrupted by their own minds. Before we go to our discussion, I want to take a moment to shine a spotlight on some incredible achievements from our community. A huge congratulations to our former PhD guest, Laura Elliott, on the launch of your new book, Dear Laura. Your father's journey and your family's liberation are stories that deserves to be told, remembered, and passed on. Wishing you every success with Dear Laura. May it reach many hearts and spark important conversations. The Women in Tech Summit Kenya 2025 is coming this November to Nairobi, a two-day premier gathering powered by Tambua Women in Tech, where students, professionals, and leaders unite to break barriers, rise into leadership, shape the future of tech. From inspiring keynotes and hands on workshops to game changing networking, this summit is more than an event, it's a movement. So save the date. Congratulations to our former PhD guest, Elaine Montilla, on your well deserved nomination for the 2025 Extraordinary Latinas Awards by United Latinas. Your journey is a powerful reflection of resilience, leadership, and the brilliance that shines across the Latina community. Here's to celebrating you and every Latina who dares to lead, inspire, and empower. Now, let's go back to our topic. Allow me to interrupt. Join us for an exciting conversation with Dr. Gilly Kahn, PhD clinical psychologist, writer, and neurodiversity specialist, as she shares insights from her newly published book. Allow me to interrupt. As psychologist reveals the emotional truth behind women's ADHD. Blending clinical expertise with personal experience as a mother, Dr. Gilly uncovers the hidden emotional lives of women and champions greater awareness around women's health and neurodiversity. If you ever felt overlooked, mislabeled, or drained from keeping up appearances, this episode is for you. It's time to interrupt the narratives that hold us back and give voice to the emotional truths that truly matter. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Gilly. Thank you so much for joining us for the second time around. And first things first, where in the world you are today?
Thank you, Jamil. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States.
And a huge congratulations to your new book, Allow Me to Interrupt. A Psychologist Reveals the Emotional Truth Behind Women's ADHD. What's inspired you to write a book specifically about ADHD in women?
Yeah, so I thought maybe I'd start with an example that is definitely relevant and something I'm feeling right now. So I had my first episode with Beata, and I was nervous about coming back on because so my book is about emotional dysregulation. It's just challenges with regulating intense emotions. And there's a lot of research support for this being highly problematic for anyone with ADHD, kids, adults, men, women. But that has not made it into the diagnostic criteria. And so clinicians and general public don't realize that emotions play an important role in ADHD. And this is something that Dr. Russell Barkley, who is a lead researcher in the field of ADHD, he has been arguing for at least 10, 15 years. And yeah, it's unfortunate. I think a lot of women now are late diagnosed for that reason. And so that's what inspired me to write this book. But I wanted to come back to why I was nervous, to come on. And, I met with Beata, maybe it was 1 or 2 times before the podcast. And, when I learned that this time I would not see her again, I lost it. I was a mess for maybe 3 hours. It completely like knocked me out. And it's, traumatic, I think, for anyone. But for me, it was, and it was one time that I met her, but it's like you feel this connection, to people. And so emotional dysregulation has a lot to do with the intensity, how intensely you feel emotions, and how difficult it is for you to move past emotions and how you handle those big emotions. So if they interfere with your ability to kind of like move through life, then that's an indication that, it could potentially be problematic for you. And that's what makes it clinically significant for people with ADHD. And so my book focuses more on girls and women because there isn't a whole lot of material out there in terms of books that are easy to understand, that are research based, and that also have like a few practical tips in them. So I chose to write about this topic because I knew I wanted to write a book. Then the question was, what am I going to write about? And I chose this one because I was running into situations in my clinical work as a psychologist where like teen girls would come in and I would detect that they were struggling with ADHD, but they would fly under the radar. Like their parents would even take them in to get tested for ADHD, and then the evaluation would come back like, no, they don't have ADHD, even though their scores were, they could be indicative, like they were borderline, or like the parent and the teen reported significant ADHD symptoms, but then the teacher didn't. And so they would come to see me, and I realized that there really was this gap in understanding of how ADHD can present in girls and women, and how emotions play a significant role in that, and how something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria plays an important role in that. A lot of people don't even know what RSD is. And so to explain it to you, RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, or rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is what Dr. Dotson is starting to call it more. So you'll see it more as sensitivity in the literature. But it's basically people with ADHD's tendency to be extremely sensitive to perceived or actual criticism by others. And this was something that a psychiatrist, Dr. Dotson, who read and blurbed my book, he's here. So that was cool. But he noticed that with his patients. And so he started writing about it, just blogging about it. And one of his blogs was taken by someone and posted on Reddit. And it just went viral because a bunch of people with ADHD read it and they thought, oh my God, this sounds like me. This is the first time anyone has ever mentioned a phenomenon like this tied to ADHD. And so then the researchers came along and they said, but you have to be careful because it's not research based. It's based on one psychiatrist's observations. So then people went and they started collecting data about rejection sensitive dysphoria. And there's a growing body of research now. It's small, but typically the best way, honestly, to conduct research, and this isn't always happening in ADHD, but it's happening in terms of RSD, is to ask people just open-ended questions about their experiences. So there was one study in a university where they interviewed women, what do you think are your biggest challenges with your ADHD? And most of them listed difficulties regulating my emotions, which is not surprising. But then a lot of them also described RSD symptoms, which could include, like for some people, people pleasing because you're worried that you're going to be rejected, rumination, where you're kind of like in your head and distracted a lot of times. And when you're distracted, you're focusing on, well, when I said this, did I offend someone? Or when I said this, um, like, did I look dumb? Or when I forgot this assignment, like, does that make me look lazy or inconsiderate? Um, and so the reason that probably is very common for people with ADHD is because it's relevant to their symptoms. If you forget a birthday, then that's not so great on your friendship, but you're more likely to forget a birthday if you have ADHD because you're forgetful. And then you get negative feedback from your environment, which is maybe a friend getting offended, and then you feel bad. And then it just becomes this loop. And so it's not just made up in your head where you think people are rejecting you, it's also based in reality and based on your personal experiences. And then over time, it becomes like a gut response, like reflexive, because you're so used to feeling and being rejected that that becomes your go-to. So people with ADHD, as they grow up, they become adults, they get bosses, and their bosses tell them, "I need to talk," or "We need to talk." The first thing that comes to their mind is, "Oh my God, this is bad. I'm in trouble," and that is related to RSD.
Your book feels incredibly personal as you share your own experiences along with those other women. Was it difficult to be so open about your own journey with ADHD?
Yes, it was. It's very, I think it's different for me. In the past, before this book, I wasn't really so open with clients about my symptoms, my mental health challenges. And to be honest, I read about this person in my book, but I was working with someone who was a colleague, but she was more advanced than me as a psychologist. And she was sort of a role model to me because she had ADHD and she was just so open about it. And it was bizarre because I had never met anyone like that, where she just talked about it in team meetings and would talk about how she related to her clients, with her ADHD and how she took her ADHD medication. And she was just talk about it like it wasn't taboo or weird. And it meant a lot to me. And that was a big motivator for me because it was something I thought I had for many years, and I was feeling frustrated because I could see it in my daughter, and I knew that I was struggling with it too. And I wanted to get her help. And then I was like, I need to get myself help too. And so when I saw that she was behaving in this way, I thought, why can't I do it too? And then I felt more comfortable with writing the book. But now that it's out, I have been feeling very weird about it because it's like my personal life is out there. But at the same time, one thing I've learned as a writer through my like instruction when I was in college, I was double majored in psychology and creative writing. And writing is something I've loved since I was really young, like 14, middle school. And I write about that in the book too. But I thought I would write fiction. I envisioned myself when I was young, that I would grow up and write fiction. And maybe I will one day. Maybe I will write a fiction book. But I found that, I took a bunch of fiction classes in college because that's what I gravitated to. And I never felt like my writing was really could be RSD, right? But never thought my fiction was really as good, in comparison to other people. And I kind of put off like this autobiography class, which is memoir basically. And then I took it and my writing really shined. Like I don't know what what is what's the difference for me. Maybe it just feels more natural. But everyone loved my writing in that class. And so that's another reason I chose to make this part memoir because, it's a learning process as you grow up. You realize what are you naturally better at. And so I figured if I would write my first book, let me try to lean into that and see how it goes. But it's a vulnerable place, and I'm writing, especially in chapter 7, really sensitive things, especially about my family. And so my dad actually read, I didn't have any of my family members, like the close ones, read the book in advance. So they're getting the book just like everyone else. And my dad just opened it immediately to chapter 7, I think because he was nervous. And he read it and he was like fine with it. He just said it was interesting and that it was helpful, for him to read. And And so yeah, I kind of ripped off the band-aid in that regard. But yeah, it was hard.
Uh, the title, Allow Me to Interrupt, is powerful line. Can you explain the meaning behind it and why you chose it?
So actually, initially, I had a different title for the book when I was pitching to agents. And then when we were pitching it to publishers, and I had an agent, my agent said that the title was too vague, and I agree with her. It was actually sensitive and selective for whoever's curious. I just kind of I thought was like it's an alliteration, and it describes people with ADHD as like their sensitivity and um, how selective they are in terms of their attention and interest. But so she said we need something else, and I was like racking my brain. I wasn't sure what to make the title. So we ended up taking a break and I creating like a list of options. And this one was mine. Allow me to interrupt. And I was really crossing my fingers and hoping that they would agree and pick this one because it's like I feel like it's a perfect title for this book. It's kind of mocking because the stereotype is that women with ADHD they interrupt, but this is intentional. But it's also like polite, but not because you're intruding and you're saying, "I allow me to interrupt." Like I'm going to interrupt, but I'm also asking for permission. But I don't really need permission. I'm just going to do it. So it's kind of sarcastic. And it has like multiple meanings. I feel like it describes ADHD in women, but it also describes, you know, speaking up. That's why there's a megaphone and correcting misperceptions. Women with ADHD feel misunderstood. And so hopefully, my book can clarify that, for anyone who has ever felt hurt because they were called something negative and they have ADHD. And if you have ADHD, chances are you've been called a lot of negative things, and it's just unfair. And so I want them to feel like they're empowered and emboldened, and able to advocate for themselves.
Your book opens by saying the world is right. ADHD girls and women do interrupt, but it's not always unintentional. Can you tell us a bit about that idea and why it is so important to reframe this behavior?
Yeah, so that's part of the book description online, and it was that ADHD girls and women interrupt, right? But it's not always unintentional. It's almost always extraordinary. Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is that there could be like accidents. Sometimes we have oopsies and things come out, and we're just like, oh shoot, and then we have to step back and correct ourselves. And so, sure, that's an unintentional interruption. But I also think that women with ADHD have a lot of really great ideas, just like anyone with ADHD, because our thoughts kind of jump from place to place, and it isn't necessarily such a bad thing because then that can lead to creative and novel ways of thinking. And so I think we have important things to say, and a lot of times people can disregard that because they're so focused on maybe the social aspect. People with ADHD, just like people who are autistic, they can struggle in social situations for slightly different reasons, but people are turned off by us because we often say what's on our mind. The oopsies are often very transparent. Like we're honest, and people are not used to honesty and bluntness, and it's repelling to them. And I want people to recognize that you know even though it can come off as harsh, we have something important to add, and we're worth listening to.
Uh, why do you think the role of emotions in ADHD has been so underemphasized for women and girls?
Yeah, so the diagnostic
Mhm.
criteria right now that are used in most countries are in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, and they historically have been based on samples that are mostly boys, and it's still the case. Now the percentage, has gone up a little bit for girls, but it's still children, and it's still mostly boys. And that's problematic because we use the criteria, first of all, to diagnose, but then also to develop questionnaires and assessment methods. And this is what the information that teachers are given. And so, I describe it in, maybe not the book, but in my articles, I've talked about it as sort of like a domino effect. Like if the first domino in the chain is flawed, which is the criteria, then everything that follows is not necessarily representative of girls and women. And so that's confusing and misleading to people. And this is why there's this misconception of ADHD is like little boys bouncing off the walls, because the criteria are objective, first of all. That means that the way they're written, they're observable. Like when I was in college, I used to participate in research, like as a research assistant. And I would go into classrooms and be a fly on the wall and just sit in a corner on a chair and score based on the kids' behavior. And that's pretty much like how the criteria are written. It's observable, what you can see. And that brings problems when you're thinking about emotions and masking, for example, which is about suppressing or trying to hide or cover symptoms. And so girls and women tend to be a lot more complicated in that regard because they're better at masking and suppressing their ADHD symptoms and their intense emotions. I'm going to backtrack on that. The intense emotion, suppressing the intense emotions part, boys are probably better at. For girls, the emotional piece is more relevant, but they're better at suppressing hyperactivity. That's why you'll see ADHD girls are less referred for testing and treatment because they're less wiggly, and they tend to be, more delightful to have in a classroom. And that's because there are differences, like biological differences between girls and boys. But really, it just comes down to the starting point, the first domino, which is the criteria.
Uh, for me, and I think for a lot of women, when something feels off, the first thought is often hormones. How does that connected to ADHD, and what does that mean for how we support women with the condition?
That's an excellent question. Yes. And hormones are only recently being given any attention in the literature in terms of ADHD in females. And it's relevant because when estrogen levels decrease for girls and women, I say girls because you can get your period when you're 12, like a preteen, or younger sometimes, then that affects your ADHD symptoms because it's connected to neurotransmitters that are related to decreases in estrogen. So when estrogen goes down, then dopamine goes down, and there's a lot of other neurotransmitters that kind of follow suit. And because of that, your ADHD symptoms get worse because when you have ADHD, your dopamine levels are already lower in your brain. And so when you are in like the week before your period, then your estrogen starts to decline. And then in response, by proxy, your dopamine level starts to decrease. And because of that, ADHD symptoms can get worse. And the same thing with like mood symptoms, because dopamine is kind of like the happy neurotransmitter. It makes you feel like excited and happy. And so if you struggle with ADHD, you may also struggle with depression. And so you slap on also more intense like menstrual cycles, or even just having a menstrual cycle like in a girl versus a boy, then your symptoms as a whole just are worse. And so this is important because right now to be diagnosed with ADHD, the symptoms must be present before age 12. And if you're a girl and you get your period at like 12, then maybe your symptoms weren't really that bad before 12 because your hormones were pretty leveled out. And then once you went through puberty, then your hormones start to fluctuate more. And then your ADHD symptoms start to interfere with your life more. And so, because that's part of the criteria, and a lot of clinicians, and especially like if you think about like pediatricians, they follow the criteria to a T. If a family comes in and they say, hey, I think my teen has ADHD, and then they ask them, well, did they struggle in school? I hate that question. Did they struggle in school before they were, 12? Or did they struggle with the same thing, when they were kids, like a 7 or an 8-year-old? And then the mom's maybe like thinking back and she's like, well, no, it wasn't that bad. They might not get an ADHD diagnosis, and that's completely unfair. You also need to think about, perimenopause and menopause. I mean, there's so many stages where your hormones change and your body changes, and women inherently are way more complicated, than men. And if you look at just medicine in general on a more global scale, the research is completely, not completely, but very biased in favor of studying men more, and even in animal research, because women and their cycles and bodily changes, like they make them kind of like unstable, not stable variables, and so that can complicate things, long term in research.
The constant pull in different directions, being overwhelmed by input but also needing more, can feel confusing. How does this push and pull feeling affect a woman's ability to navigate her career or start an entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, so that's a really good question too. Sorry, I'm hearing these for the first time and they're great. Yeah, so that's really hard to answer because I have lived experience, and it's confusing when you have ADHD because you try to explain it to people and they almost think you're hypocritical when you explain something, or because it might contradict. You say, well, I'm really passionate about this thing, and that's why I'm interested in it. But sometimes you're so passionate about it that you like have spent so much time doing it that then you get burnt out, and then you kind of get bored of it, and then you lose interest and you want to do something else. And that's why, in my book, I talk about how it's helpful to juggle a little bit, like have a few different interests or hobbies or possibilities. Like for me, I'm a psychologist, but then I also love writing. And so it helps me to switch off, and kind of having two careers. And I've done that since, college in terms of my interests. The other thing is, I think it's helpful because you might face disappointment in one hobby or passion or career, but then you realize that this is not the only thing in your life and you have something else. And when you're disappointed and you feel rejected and like a failure, it can be hard, especially if you have an ADHD brain, to continue on whatever has disappointed you. And so it could be helpful, if possible, to kind of give that like mental pause. Like, yeah, I wouldn't pause seeing clients, but I might think, okay, whatever happened, I'm gonna compartmentalize it and let me just focus on, spilling more of my energy into the writing until, I recover a little bit, and then I can come back. And it's a nice balance.
For you, Dr. Gilly, what are the top three soft skills all career driven females, especially those with ADHD, should have?
What are the top three skills?
Yes, soft skills.
Soft skills that someone with ADHD should have. Self-compassion is number one. So I think, okay, I'm going to back up. One is self-education or speaking with a professional who is knowledgeable, who can educate you. And so that's why I wanted to make sure that I, like, people have told me, they're like, your book is easy to read, but you don't skimp on information. Like, there's definitely a lot of information in there. So I feel like you're going to finish the book and feel like you are a mini expert on ADHD in women, but it's not going to feel overwhelming when you read it. But I think it's helpful because when you're informed, when you know that you have ADHD, even as a start, then that's part of the healing process, because then there's a reason and a name for what you're struggling with. And you know, you're not alone. And maybe you can find other people who are struggling with something similar. But I think knowledge is number one. And then number two, I would say, is self-compassion. So once you understand what's going on, even with RSD, for example, if you didn't know that that existed, you might go now on a rabbit hole and read. You might go on a rabbit hole and then, sorry, I just saw a comment here, and read about RSD. But even knowing like what it is, and then being able to just say to yourself, okay, this is the way that my brain works, and this is something that's hard for me. And so I'm going to take it easy on myself and give myself space rather than judging myself for whatever happened. I'm just going to roll with this, ride the wave of my emotion. And then once I come back to baseline, then I'll make a decision, you know, based on what I think is like wisest and how should I handle the situation, if it's worth even handling at all. And then
Uh,
number,
okay,
yes.
go on.
Did you want me to add another one?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And then number three, I have to pick a third one. Okay, so the first one is knowledge. Second one is self-compassion. And then okay, so three is work with your brain instead of against it. So I have like a bunch of like skills for that in the book. But I think once you kind of identify what's going on, to exhibit self-compassion on, you know, forgiveness for yourself. Then three, you can start to identify things that work in your life to help you be productive and shine as best as you can. And so for example, for me, I learned that when I write, listening to a certain type of music like really helps me. And music helps a lot of people with ADHD, like increase productivity. You know, it might help me to like set a timer if I have to do like menial, like boring chores around the house. Maybe not when I'm trying to be creative, but if I need to fold laundry and I'm just bored, I turn it into a race and then I'm more productive. And so when you learn how your brain works, then you can break down more specific solutions or things you could do to help yourself.
Speaking of solutions, people with ADHD are often great problem solvers. What is your strategy for problem solving, and how can the unique ADHD brain be an asset in this area?
Okay, so people with ADHD are often great problem solvers. Not not instinctually. That's part of the problem with executive functioning. But I think once they're taught some steps to problem solve, then it can come more easily to them. At least the people I've worked with, it's generally not so natural. But I like to walk people through a few steps to problem solve. So the first step that I think is helpful is identifying the problem. So I'll have my clients like in one sentence write down. I like writing because we are field dependent and visual learners for the most part. Like if we could see the information on a page, then it's easier to manipulate it, like make sense of it, rather than just keeping it in our heads. And so I'll have them write the problem in one sentence. The next step is to come up with as many solutions as they can. I tell them to even write down the solutions that sound crazy or solutions that they would just never do because it's like you never know. Sometimes you think, I would never choose this solution. And then you look back on it later and you change your mind. So I think it's helpful to just write anything that comes to mind, even if it's not And then they can go in and veto the ones where they decide after looking through all the options, I'm definitely not going to do these. And they end up picking, like two or three that then we're going to dissect into pros and cons for each one. So we'll take the first solution and then identify the pros and cons for that one, the second and the third. And then they either end up with like a plan A and a plan B, or I've had clients even look at two solutions and say, I can combine these and come up with some kind of like a compromise. And so I think teaching that skill to people has been helpful, because then I see people, then they go and they do it on their own. And it breaks it up into steps. It's much less overwhelming and abstract.
I can see that we have a comment from our viewers, Jane. I feel like there's a trend on people diagnosing themselves as ADHD. How ADHD influence in terms of cultural societal views?
Yeah, so those are two different questions. I could start with the first one. So, or the first one was more of a comment or an observation. Yeah, I think a lot of people, or at least I hear that from people a lot, where they get frustrated because people are self-diagnosing. I think I feel torn about that subject because here I am talking about how women are not being properly diagnosed. And so if they're not being properly diagnosed and the criteria were not developed for them, and then people are, they go to a professional like their doctor, maybe someone else like in the UK, and their doctor tells them like, what are you nuts? Like you don't have ADHD, but then they feel deep down that they do. And, they've read my book, or they read Russell Barkley's books, or, you know, they looked into maybe more credible sources. I've had some women actually who are ADHD coaches. They have a child with ADHD and they were told they don't have ADHD. So it's hard for me, to say this is a problem. But also I also don't like, and maybe other people can relate to this, but I also don't like when people just flat out say, just period, say ADHD is a superpower, period, because that's a problem. Because I think we have strengths and we have weaknesses, and for the weaknesses, we need support. And if people don't acknowledge there are weaknesses, then we don't get support. And then what's the point of any support or a diagnosis? And so that's a problem for people who actually struggle. And it makes me question too when people say it's my superpower. Then I wonder, like, did they improperly self-diagnose themselves because maybe they don't truly understand that it is a disorder? But yeah, I also understand that there's contextual issues, right? And I write about that. Like, we live in a world that's not built for us. And then there's the question, is it a disorder? Is it the world? It's a hard question to answer. So I feel like that answers the societal views. And then with the cultural views, yeah, so I said like the UK, because I know that it's really hard to get diagnosed there. Maybe it's not just with ADHD, I think probably anything. There's just like really long waits. I've heard from people that it's taken them 2 years to get testing, or they've been waiting 2 years and they still haven't gotten testing, and they've been like on a wait list. And so it's so unfair, for those people. They're coming out and they're self-diagnosing, but also what are they supposed to do? Like they don't get the services that they need. Um, so I feel like, yeah, like your where you live geographically, like that could affect um, services and awareness. And then also there's the issue of stigma. In certain cultures, there's more stigma, directed at certain diagnoses or mental health in general. And so in those cultures, maybe you're less likely to get diagnosed. There's also, differences. Mental health is complicated first of all, there's gender, of course, the sex, biological sex, but then, there's culture too, where if you're from a certain cultural background and then maybe you move to the US, and the United, people in the US are not used to like your customs or your mannerisms or your eye contact or your tone of voice or your timidity or anything like that. They might overlook you, or they might improperly diagnose you because of like cultural biases. And so that's a problem too.
This is a topic that I didn't know much about before, but your book has been so educational and helpful, and of course, very eye opening for me. What would you say to someone who reads your book and recognize themselves in the stories but isn't sure if they have ADHD?
Those are actually my favorite people to talk to when I don't love giving talks, but when I've given talks, people will come up and they share their research, and I'm just like, okay, this is interesting. But my favorite people to talk to are the ones who come to me and they say, I didn't know this existed, and thank you because I think this is me. Because that means I'm reaching more people and who can be helped. And so the point of the book is not to diagnose anyone or to have them self-diagnose. It's just to raise awareness because if you don't know about something, then how are you supposed to help yourself? So the first step would be, to read it, see if you can identify with it, and then I would say to go look up in your area people who specialize in ADHD. I think if you go to your primary care doctor or your pediatrician, they might be wrong for the reasons that I listed before. And there's research that shows that too. Like they're just they tend to be not as accurate, as if you go to a mental health provider. A mental health provider could be a psychologist or it could be a psychiatrist. You could start with a psychiatrist. It kind of depends on what your needs are and how old you are. Like if you're younger and or you're a parent and you'd like to get your child like school accommodations, then I think going to a psychologist and getting some psychological testing done is valuable. But not necessary. It depends on the family.
The books is valuable resource not only for those with ADHD but also for their loved ones. What do you hope the friends and family of someone with ADHD will learn from your book?
I hope they can, I'm interesting because the book came out yesterday. So I've had a few people, comment on my social media or send me a video or a voice recording, and like everyone is crying. Everyone's crying while reading the book, but they tell me they're good tears because it's helping them like reflect, on their struggles and also feel hopeful. And they're all like thanking me, for writing about this topic because it's hard to find a book like this, specifically for women. So I hope that, they can walk away maybe feeling okay with crying. Crying is part of existence and it's beautiful, right? Without crying, we wouldn't have emotions. And then what's the point of being alive? And so, yeah, I hope, they can walk away with some more clarity, feeling validated, and then feeling empowered and educated.
I am feeling empowered and educated, and of course, I did not finish it yet, but I will because it's a new for me, and I'm not really reading a lot of psychology books, but I enjoyed this one. So, uh, thank you
I'm
and
so happy to hear that.
congratulations again. And
Thank you.
the book seems to challenge some of the mainstream understanding of ADHD. What are a few things people commonly get wrong about ADHD that you really wanted to set the record straight on?
Well, I guess at a basic level, like ADHD is different in women. But I think the most important piece really for me here is the emotion part. I mean, as I was just preparing to write the book, there were some things about the criteria because I looked at them very carefully where I was honestly shocked. It's stuff I didn't even realize when I was being trained in graduate school. And I actually I went to my graduate program and I talked to the students about the book, and they still are not being trained. And it's not about the program. I love this program, don't get me wrong. It's most programs are like this. And if you look at the criteria, like most of the diagnoses, they end with like what makes something a clinical disorder is the way the symptoms affect your functioning and or if they introduce like clinically significant distress, right? Like sometimes you can be depressed and then do fine at school, be with friends, but you're kind of going through the motions. And that doesn't mean you're not depressed, So that's where the distress is. And if you look at ADHD, they don't even include the distress. They just say clinically significant dysfunction, right? In daily functioning issues, but they don't even mention the distress piece. So not only, did they not include emotional dysregulation after even Dr. Russell Barkley talks about this, like he was trying to include a few criteria that would focus on emotions, and basically, the committee chose not to include that. And he goes into like in some of his lectures and his papers as to why he thinks that is. But even, beyond that, they don't even have that, indicator of potentially struggling, the symptoms being distressing to them. So yeah, I would just want, people to recognize that that does play an important role in ADHD. It's not just what you can see.
I have there's one quote that really stuck to me, and it says, "Don't let all the criticism stand in the way of you trying." What does that mean to you, and what message do you hope that sends to your readers?
I don't remember where that was actually, but I'm gonna roll with it. So yeah, so it's kind of in line, yeah, with the message of the book, that we know realistically that people with ADHD, unfortunately, right, because we live in a world that was not built for us, are more likely to get criticized and rejected. And actually, like the number one, predictor of rejection is the emotional dysregulation part, like the emotional dysregulation symptoms relevant to ADHD, above and beyond the hyperactivity and the impulsivity. And it makes sense when you really think about it, because people don't want to have an angry friend or a friend who, is overly excited and like talks about what they're interested in, and like no one cares. And sorry, I'm losing track of what I was saying. Oh, yeah. So just to, be aware that, that could happen. You can get rejected and criticized like in real life. But when you're really, really passionate about something, don't let that get in the way, because then it's like they win. And why are you going to let someone who rejected and criticized you win? So I think it's helpful and it's empowering to think like, just prove them wrong. Use that as fuel to continue doing what you love. And if it really, really matters to you, then whatever you're doing goes above and beyond in terms of importance in comparison to, I don't know, this person's opinion.
Uh, you talk about the difference between values and goals. Without getting into specific strategies, can you briefly explain the concept why knowing the difference is so helpful for people with ADHD?
Yeah, I love talking about this stuff. So I like to use a lot of acceptance and commitment therapy with my clients. And so I write about some of those strategies in the book as something that could be helpful to you. And I really like ACT. That's like the shorthand for it, or the acronym, but you say ACT. And there's a reason for that, because you're acting on your goals, right? So that's why it's called ACT and not ACT. But acceptance and commitment therapy emphasizes working toward your values, which are things that are important to you. They're more global aspects like family, friendship, creativity. And the difference between a value and a goal is that a value sort of serves like a compass. It gives you a sense of direction. And then a goal is like, the goals are the destinations along the way. So it makes more sense when you're setting goals to start with a compass, because otherwise you don't know where you're going and you don't know what's important to you. And this is helpful for teens. I mostly work with teens, so that's, I don't know. So it came up, but it's helpful even for teens, because let's say they're like applying for college, they often feel very lost about what should I major in, and then parents often they come in and they try to reassure their teens, like, don't worry about it. You have plenty of time. You can make up your mind as you go along. But then also, wouldn't it be nice if you went into college with more confidence and awareness of where you'll really thrive based on what you're passionate about? Because if you have ADHD, then you're more likely to be successful in areas that are interesting to you, which is why a lot of people, including me, struggle in like primary school and high school because it's very generic, the education. But then when they get to college, they do a lot better because they get to pick their classes and their majors. So picking maybe like your top 10 values, the things that are really important to you, then can help you kind of decide on what would I like to do with my life. And then based on that, you set specific goals that align with what matters to you. And so I think it's chapter 3 where I write about like following your passion. And this is kind of how I break it down. Like, how do you figure out what you're passionate about?
I'm sure many people are eager to get their hands on a copy. Where can people buy the book? And are you planning any events or tours to promote it?
Yeah, so you can get the book if if you're out of the United States. It's being sold internationally, so I'm not sure like which bookstores outside of the US, but if you Google it, I bet you'll find it at a bookstore, maybe not in person yet because it's still new, but you can find it online. But major retailers include Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Target, Walmart, um, or you could just look at my website. That there I have a link to like the Simon and Schuster. They're the distributor website where you'll have a few options of where you can order the book. And my website is just drgillykahn.com. And then in my touring, no, but I will be having like a local book signing on Saturday, September 13th between 2 and 4 p.m. at Barnes& and Noble in East Cobb, Marietta, if you happen to be in my area. But yeah, oh, one thing I wanted to add too is I've been posting about this on my social media accounts, but if you read the book and you like it, or if you don't like it, you can leave a review and then take a screenshot of the review just to show me that you wrote one, and then include an address, and I can send you, because I'm going to be giving out like handmade bookmarks. I have it here. Oh no, I don't. This is not the book with the bookmark. They're cute. But I'd be happy to mail you one as a thank you.
Okay, I know this is the second time around, and so we are towards the end of our show. Dr. Gilly, what is the number one book you can sit and think, oh, I wish I read before I started my career?
Oh, on writing by Stephen King. Yeah, I'm laughing because I said this during the last time that I talked with you guys, so it has not changed. Um, but yeah, that actually, the person I was telling you about, the professional who has ADHD, when she found out I was writing a book, she bought me that book. And the reason she bought me on writing is because Stephen King is the author that got me into creative writing when I was 14. I love psychological thrillers. I mean, now it's not really my genre, but I'm actually rereading Carrie that he wrote. It's a psychological thriller. But his writing style is really what speaks to me because it's very simple, straightforward. I love it. I don't know if you guys maybe hopefully see any similarities because he was a huge inspiration to me. And so that's the reason, she bought it for me, but it's such a good book. And I listened to it on audio, and it was really, really helpful and inspirational, I think, as someone who is just starting to write. So if you're ever thinking about writing, or publishing a book, then I highly, highly recommend On Writing.
Let's imagine that you could meet anyone in the world for a private breakfast. Who would it be and where would you choose to meet?
If I could meet anyone in the world for a private breakfast, I'm pretty sure I picked my mom last time. I'll pick her again because, yeah. So the book is dedicated to my mom. She passed away when I was 4, and I miss her. I think that's probably why I got really emotional too, Beata. But the other thing too is I recently lost a friend who passed away in a similar way. Um, so how, Beata has been missing, it was the same thing. My friend went missing. And so, yeah, it hit me. And maybe I would want to meet her too. I don't know. I can't choose, but I would want to, connect with them again.
And for our last questions, can you please give us your favorite life lesson quote?
My favorite life lesson quote. Um, I know I gave a quote from Stephen King. Here, it's a long one. You guys wrote it here. Thank you. Okay, talent renders, this is very much in line with what we were talking about before, so it'll make sense to you. Talent renders the whole idea of rehearsal meaningless. When you find something at which you are talented, you do it, whatever it is, until your fingers bleed or your eyes are ready to fall out of your head. I just love how gruesome that is. But also, it's just, it's very direct. And I think, perseverance is very important. And I think people with ADHD, when they love something and they're really, really dedicated, they can be so, so successful, right? So, don't let the criticism get to you. It's okay to feel what you're feeling, and then you pick yourself back up and you keep going if it's something that really matters.
And thank you so much, Dr. Gilly. And that's it from 191 of the PhD live stream. Thanks to our guest, Gilly Kahn. Oh, this we have a last minute comment from IPOV. What a terrific show. Thank you so much, Dr. Gilly Kahn, and well done, Jimin. Producer Racy and all the team for this fantastic PhD hack the future. Thank you, ladies, for your passion. Thank you so much, Patrick. And to stay updated and ensure you never miss a positivity hack delivered, follow Women on IT and turn on notifications to be alerted once a video has been released. Next week, we'll dive into a topic maximizing your potential, a brain injury survivor's guide to happiness. Join us to gain valuable insights from Daniel Brazan. As always, our positivity quote comes from positive thinking only and goes look for something positive each day, even if some days you have to look a little harder. Today is your day to hack the future, hack the positivity you want. Thank you.
Thank you.